Today I'm speaking to XiuLing Guo. XiuLing is the CEO of Nurasa. Nurasa is leading efforts to accelerate affordable and sustainable foods across Asia. She has 2 decades of experience in retail, agribusiness, and food innovation, including senior leadership at Cargill, where she has driven transformation in complex markets across Asia and the world. At Scale Up Bio, which was a joint venture between ADM and Kremer, XiuLing helped startups scale alternative proteins and precision fermentation processes. She is passionate about Asia's role that it's playing as a launchpad for global food innovation, and she's a champion of collaboration and consumer-centered design. She also loves purpose-driven leadership to shape more sustainable food for the future. And as you'll see in our discussions, she's involved in a lot of different things around the world that are really accelerating food innovation, but also playing a big role in the transformation of our food ecosystem. So we're happy to have her today and hope you enjoy the session. Today I have XiuLing. She's the CEO of Nurasa. Nurasa is a really exciting organization. She's based in Singapore. We're going to learn more about that. But XiuLing, welcome, and great to have you here. Maybe you could start by introducing yourself and giving us a little bit of your background. You've got a long background in the food industry, so we'd love to hear it.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you for having me here. Wow, how to start with? I always like to start with actually by education. I'm a mechanical engineer, and then just by surprise enter into the food industry offered by German retail group Metro, an opportunity without considering any of my background, and I just want to train someone that they can help to build a business. That's how I enter into the food business. And then fast forward to 20 plus years, that's kind of disclose how old I am today.
It's okay. You're in good company with that. So, yeah.
So kind of I would say very fortunate to have an opportunity to work, start with Metro as a merchandiser, and then 11 years with Yum China, the largest, most successful food service fast food company in China. And then Cargill, another nearly 11 years with Cargill, and then now 2.5 years, 2 years with Nurasa. So the experience, I guess, probably crossed from upstream agriculture technology to the downstream to the consumers. And now it is a very new business model, which is Nurasa. So looking forward to in the next hour and share and exchange our ideas about how we shape the future of the food innovation with you.
Great. Yeah, thank you for being here, and also perspective coming out of based in Singapore and in Asia. So in a nutshell, I mean, Nurasa, of course, people can go to the website, but tell us what you're doing. I know we met when you first were getting the project going, but love to hear how it's evolved and what your mission is and how you're engaging.
Yeah, indeed, Daniel. Our last chat in a little restaurant in Lausanne and to now is like time flies. The mandate of Nurasa, and it's actually need to give credit to Temasek, the 100% shareholder of Nurasa. The mandate to Nurasa at the time, when the idea was kind of germinized within the organization, was about accelerate the sustainable food innovation for Asia. That's the mandate. And I was very fortunate to be offered this opportunity to really figure out how and what exactly we're going to do, and who will do that with Nurasa together. So the after a few months of discussions with the industry partners, and also from my personal belief after so many years worked in the food industry, we believe the acceleration of the sustainable food adoption must address a few very, very important points. One, Asia is the largest, fastest growth market for the future food consumption. And the second is in Asia, food always linked with culture. So the diversity of the food, the local taste, and also affordability are very critical. And third is it's a very, very large region and also very fragmented by nature. The accessibility for the general consumers for all these sustainable food and nutritious food are very important. To solve these three components together, And then Nurasa formed this ecosystem approach. And then partnership is very, very important. Demonstrate few type of partnership, public-private partnership, being based in Singapore, being owned by Temasek, and also a very, very progressive government policies and regulatory partners. So we kind of really demonstrate a public-private partnership. And the second is the corporate partnership, who really believe the innovations and new ways innovations. So partner like Givaudan, like Barry Callebaut, like yourself, Flavor Wikis, and then whoever we believe have shared the value that we work together. And then the third partnership is really about the employees, actually. I think employees are a very important element of that. The employees of our own and also the people come from our partners. They all join me with a true belief in terms of, what new model can work, and then how we create a different way of working for this market going forward. So yeah, that's kind of in a high level, that's what we do.
Great. Great. And would you say that your focus at Nurasa, but also maybe just in general, the most pressing problems, which I suspect that you focus on the most pressing problems that need solving in such a case. Would you say that those are more supply chain related, or they're more consumption health related, all of the above? I think it's interesting in the Western world. I mean, I live in Europe, and a lot of the food industry actually kind of emanates from the US, right? Because that's where the packaged food industry kind of started. Most of the big companies are based there. But as you mentioned, Asia it's a really big place. Like, where exactly does that start and end? You have Southeast Asia, you have Korea, Japan, China, then you start to get into Central Asia and the subcontinent. It's a tremendously culturally diverse place. The population is growing incredibly fast. There's huge economic diversity there too. So, cost is always a critical thing in food, but it's a big thing when you have, even potentially parts of the population that are less economically capable growing faster. Where would you see some of the main concerns there, which I think even probably might not even be the same types of concerns we have in the US and the Western world, where we have big conglomerates that are breaking up and selling pieces all over the place, where maybe in Asia it's a bit different. I actually don't know. I'd love to hear your perspective on that, and how those things are different challenges.
That's a very big question. I hope I can answer probably just glimpse of that from
Give it a try.
okay, we'll try. That's a big problem. That's a big question. And we can sit here for a day. So let me probably first to start with what are the common challenges that we are solving together. Food industry it can be very interesting, innovative, but also in a way could be a very traditional. So as you mentioned, food always related to culture, food always related to the way how we consume food. And consumer can easily switch their iPhones, but consumer doesn't normally easily to switch their diet. So
that's a great statement. That's very true. It's very true. Yes.
Right. Yeah. So it is that's a common challenge. And then product push approach and also the supply chain, always an important element of that. We have seen like some I would say a pioneers in the industry, like back to 2018 to 20, when the alternative protein in the boom. You can see new technology and product push and larger scale productions kind of mimic what are the large packaged food conglomerate, how they've been successful. And some parts were successful. However, the production cycle, the product cycle actually relatively short, because it didn't solve a fundamental problem of the consumer. I can try something new, but do I want to eat it every day? That's a different story. Can I afford to eat it every day? That's another different story, right?
Yeah. So is the market there? Is the market accessible?
Exactly.
I mean, it goes back to this classical problem that all entrepreneurial people have, which is product market fit.
Exactly.
Is the timing correct? Is the timing correct to support the scale that I need in order to make my business work? I mean, there are a lot of, just forces in the world, despite the best intentions, right?
Yeah, indeed. So then move on to what I think is in Asia is a different, and then the differences could be a benefit in terms of how to do things differently. first, before we even talk about food, we always need to take one step back, look at who's eating the food, right? The population, the demographic of Asia, and also the economic development of the whole region. Asia is actually the fastest growth, as you earlier rightly call out, the largest population growth, but also important to see their food industry innovation in the last 30 years. I myself is actually involved in the last 20 years, but in the last 30 years, when the Asia Tiger started, the fast economic growth. And then today, in terms of in the next 5 to 10 years, when we see the economic growth will be largely driven by the Southeast Asia and the South Asia region. So the change you can see is when we talk about Asia, we need to think about that term was introduced from academia or economic terms. However, when we think about food, we are talking about very different type of a consumer, a different type of food. And then in Asia in the last 30 years, 20 years, I would say, leading the digital, the modernization of the retail, and then which also changed very different. I was part of it in reality, right? So the food delivery, the e-commerce, the growth, China is leading that. And then the whole Southeast Asia, the generation pickup, and now India's and markets like India start to pick up. So the retail sector is very different in Asia since the last 20 years, and then will continue to evolve in the next 10 years. And digital adoption, smartphone adoptions, so the consumer behavior are very different. So with that, then we think about, okay, the food, how we solve the fundamental consumer still want to eat food, relatively familiar, not too strange, but must taste good, affordable, accessible. That means the demand creation part of the innovation, in my mind, is very important and also unique in terms of how Asia will address the innovation. The consumer in Asia, they are very curious. They don't mind trying new things because there are so many new things appearing in front of them, TikToks and the Pinduoduos and all these kind of platforms, Shopees and Grab Foods. The platform, they are so different. However, when they reach to the consumer, consumers still want to see, is that food I want to consume all the time or repetitively.
So they're demanding in terms of the, let's say, different aspects of the product. Do I like it? Quality, things like this. But I think you're absolutely right, is that first of all, in Asia, you could just see it when you are there. It's, so much more advanced in many technological ways. But every time we deal with a project in an Asian country, it's typically the case that, you have trends happening very quickly, right? Whereas like in Europe, food in particular is more deeply rooted in the culture. Like slow food is more deeply rooted in the culture. But it's an interesting problem, right? If you have a fast moving adoption curve, but also a very high bar for quality and deliverable, right? Like I think
Yes.
that's an interesting combination.
Indeed, and if it tastes good, social media will amplify. It doesn't taste good, social media also amplifies. So,
Yeah.
but I would say the product cycles, and then you can see when we look at the very fragmented market, and then even in China, when it comes to food, also may not represent the whole country, whole country as one. So when people ask me Chinese food, I always say, which part of China are you talking about?
Yeah.
So let's take overall Asia as very fragmented because of the culture, because of the way how the product has been produced. So let's take on that, and I would say the product cycle and then the influence. So it's like a shorter and quicker and faster in a smaller cycle, but that evolve beyond just one area. So they can influence cross, but require a quick adaptation because of flavor differences, including in country like China or India. East India or West India or South and North, their food are very different actually. Even curry tastes different in Thailand.
I mean, yeah, they're huge countries, and yeah, very diverse, billion plus people. So yeah, it's yeah, also, by the way, Italy, for example, is super diverse in its food, even Westerners don't always think this, but like different types of pasta are preferred in different regions, different styles of food. And it's all rooted in history, how people grow up, on those types of.
Yes, I would fully agree with that. That was when I reflect on the Asia cultures, I think there are lots of similarities with Europe because there's no one type of food, right?
Mhm,
So as you said, pasta have many different type of pasta.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. And so do you think, jumping to kind of like the companies you're trying to partner with and help and to supply the world with food, and particularly in Asia, do you think that the modern food infrastructure, which again I think is heavily dominated by the US corporate culture, do you think that there's a model there that works in Asia? Does it need to be built differently from the ground up? Do they need to adapt differently? Like, what are your observations there, with respect to how, the major players in the space? I mean, Cargill and the rest, they're big global companies. How are they potentially approaching those problem sets differently due to the speciality of the Asian situation?
It's a very good questions. That would be with my very limited experience working the company that I worked for, and then in the last probably 20 years observations. Uh, let's always start with what are common. I think common is efficiencies in the supply chain, efficiency in terms of the how to say this, to scale to a larger uh, production size, and therefore to reduce the unit cost to
Mhm,
reach the attractive affordability. I think that's common, that
mhm,
everybody need to work towards that. And how the supply chain need to work together to address and deliver that
mhm,
might not be exactly the same, because of the infrastructure, as you call out at the very beginning, infrastructure are very different. The regulatories and the tech structures, and then also the way how product has been produced. And the Asia Pacific region always have domestic production plus imports. So
mhm,
so with that, I would say in a common is economic of scale is important, and everybody should work towards that. The differences, probably I would say when we look at the US multinationals, you always see when we do like a market analysis for any strategy conversation, is like the top three, top five already dominate the market. So very large,
yeah,
so highly concentrated. So they
right.
had to scale them. When it come to Asia, they say top five. Oh yeah, I'm a leading country already, but the top five add up together is like a quarter of the total market share, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's kind of a typical, very different to market structure. So with that, the differences will be always say what are the any company, what are the business model that able to address the fragmentation of the market. The fragmentation on paper, it looks it's like 2 to 3%, etc. But when you look at the absolute number in terms of people or customer you're serving, is very
Mhm,
big because of the population. The scale of the population in Asia is different. So I think
mhm,
that really required a change of the mindset.
mhm, mhm. Okay. And what then do you think we as the global food industry should be thinking about in terms of when we go to the Asian market? Like, I mean, even in my own business, we do consumer insights, we're asked mostly to do work for in Asian countries or in these types of countries by the big food companies, right? Because they want to be playing in those markets because
Yeah.
they're growing large populations and things like this. And to me, that sort of speaks to a potential future of just westernization of consumption habits, which we could talk about whether or not that's good or bad. But how do you think that's the best way to leverage that different type of ecosystem, the more fragment type of ecosystem, and kind of bring those players along so that they can continue to add into this big world of food consumption in a way that's positive. I mean, I don't want to name names in any of these cases, of course, but it's not. I don't think that it's the best outcome that, say, the big fast food chains from the West just start, you know, coming in and moving out the local players. I see some of that happening even locally here in Switzerland, right, where the consumption the playbook is so much more well refined in terms of how they go to market, how they identify what a consumer wants there, how they adapt their kind of core product, which they can mass produce at low cost, like you say, how they get that into the market for commercial reasons. I mean, they want to make money. But then, of course, we're losing something in terms of the diversity of of the the food that we have available to us. But you're also losing a lot of diversity in the supply chain. I mean, you can go all the way down to just simply, nutrition. So, like, how Asia maybe presents an interesting opportunity in that it hasn't been kind of harmonized so heavily the way that, say, for example, the US is. And I was in the US recently, and I remarked to somebody who was with me, I said, I feel like every hotel I go to around the country has the same menu, right? Like
Yes.
it's basically, yes, it's maybe a slightly different thing. Like the blackberries are different in one place versus the other, but the menu items are the same. And the response, 'cause the person knows a lot about the food industry, it's like, well, like, yeah, well, all the menus are made by, Aramark or some big supplier, right? And that was a dramatic realization for me in that it's such a big country with such a massive amount of commercial opportunity that you have that level of dominance that you can go to totally different, disconnected, places, different hotel chains, different brands, the different companies running them. And at the end of the day, they all kind of start to seem the same, right? And I was like, wow, first of all, it's nice. I don't think it's great, but like everything becomes predictably similar, right?
You, you're spot on. That's kind of
Yeah.
my travel experience in,
Yeah.
um,
Um,
so let me summarize to make sure. I think the question you want to ask is actually the differences, right? So what are the way how like leading American food companies is standardization, the affordability, the cost, efficiency is always a top priority.
right,
But when
right.
we look at Asia, just refer back to my days in Yum. You can see Yum China. The reason when I say Yum, I specifically emphasize I work for Yum China because it's a different business model.
Yeah. Okay.
During that time, Yum China is actually one of the most innovative company. During my time, we launched more than 200 new products a year.
Okay. Well,
Menu is completely different than the US, and so when we think about the consumer in Asia, if you feed them every day in a hotel or in a situation, you have no choice, right? So kind of you just eat whatever. But the hotel, if only offer very boring things, consumer will not like it. And then if you
right.
come to the hotels, even I use Holiday Inn as example. The Holiday Inn, China, in Southeast Asia, and in the Pacific, in Australia, New Zealand, they offer very different things because
Yeah.
they can't offer the same thing. One is cost may not be efficient because there's no such supply chain structure in
Mhm.
compare with the United States, and then also their consumers are very different. So when we put the consumer inputs in the center of everything, we make decisions. The points you made earlier could explain because country could be very big. You have a 300 million consumers, but the diversity of the consumer are low.
Mhm.
But when we look at a country, could be I just use probably let's use Indonesia as the example, right? Indonesia counts the how many islands in the whole country. Actually, the diversity of the consumer, even the population may not be as big as the United States. It's big enough as a country, but the diversity is very high. So the challenge is actually for Asia is the consumer for any food use of food to attract either hotel, restaurants, or packaged food to attract your customer. You need to
Mhm.
offer a lot of variety of products. Then what
Mhm.
will be the balance between the high SKU products versus each SKU's cost components. So that's many times is a challenge. And then
Right.
how we solve this challenge. So that will back to a point when you started this conversation is how we partner with different peoples, right? So to like the Nurasa model is actually well, our partnerships is really to aggregate everybody's focus in a relatively small niche area, and then we
Mhm.
aggregate them together to create the synergies, and therefore to make it more affordable, either from innovations or use your technology, Daniel, for example, use your technology, and also to use our other partner like Very Calables or Givaudan's and all the others partners. So this kind of model will be required to make it affordable. So kind of a bit more like timeshare type of solutions in many ways.
Yes. Actually, let's talk about this a little bit more. I've heard the term scaling down, right? Like people always talk about, oh, how do I scale up? Like how do I produce more from a small amount of knowledge or production capacity? Because that brings economies of scale, right? Like this lovely thing that we talk about in capitalism. But being able to take a solution, whether or not it's a technology or an approach or a knowledge base, and scale it down is definitely a problem I think the food industry has. I mean, maybe the big food companies don't care about that as much, but when you have a fragmented supply chain, like you're describing in Asia, those small companies or smaller companies, even if they have a large population to serve, they're not going to go away. Like that's what's supplying food in those countries. Like people need to eat, right? And so I've observed this also with consumer insights, with sensory sciences, and the areas that we deal with, is that there isn't a really good solution yet. I mean, we're working on how to solve this that scales down to bring the expertise, learning, and application that the larger players can bring to bear to be competitive, to be cost effective, to bring all of those lovely things to the consumer. The small ones don't have access to that because there's no way for them to get access to that knowledge, service, whatever you might have you, in kind of just a small tidbit. And when you look at the technology industry, going back 15 years, there's so many softwares, what we call SaaS or freemium software, things like this, right? Where, you know, bunches of companies started taking tools that used to just be enterprise tools that were only available to big companies. And they said, well, look, like we can make this now available to many people on the internet. We can make them easy and intuitive to use so that we don't have to service the customer. The customer can away self-service on only small amounts of value that they need. And we can also then justify scaling the cost of that down to a place where they can afford it. Now with software, once it's built, there's no kind of cost of goods, right? It's like a little bit of electricity. That's it. And so I think that the software industry has really totally revolutionized the way that people have access to information, data. I mean, Facebook did this for advertising, right? Like you no longer have to have a big fancy marketing campaign to advertise your product. Like you can use all these online tools. But the food industry, both with respect to the expertise required to do this and for the actual physical supply chain of it, has not yet figured out a way to do that, which is why big food companies tend to dominate these situations. And I think that this is a problem, right? It is a problem with the way that the industry functions today. And I would love to hear your perspective on how, we can work together with universities or, or with small companies, or even if it's even possible to do this. Like, could a company that's only selling $500,000 worth of product a year get access to the same types of techniques and expertise in a consumable way to be able to be as sophisticated as, say, Coca-Cola, right? I mean, is it even possible?
I would 100% agree. And many times in strategic term, we call a long tail, those kind of a small, medium customers. In the consolidated market, the long tail actually is only represent like 25% market share with a huge amount of number of customers. In Asia, the long tail is actually represent 75%
It's the big
market
part.
share.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
So the long tail definition in the Asian market, fragment market, is quite different. So
Yeah.
always, I think your technology company is a very good example to show that what are the different models that can work, and then provide a platform, therefore that Nurasa and kind of to define ourselves as a growth platform, and partnership with yourself and your solutions is exactly representing our belief in terms of how we help that. I call us the food industry is actually by nature a medium size or smaller company industry.
Mhm.
So large corporation actually also in Asia Pacific, they also are struggling now. Struggle means the products they thought they were very attractive, good, and actually not meeting the consumer needs. So their market share has been eaten by those kind of a rising medium-sized brand. But acquisition strategy doesn't also work. Why? Because when you acquire them, you cannot scale up to the level, as you said earlier. Scale up sometimes doesn't work well. So,
Right.
so the acquisition also doesn't have a good return. And then the new business model will be actually required because at the end it's underserved. Right? There is underserved the market with a very fast growth rate
Right.
in the health, nutritious, and also in terms of from a food safety point of view, also very important in the Asia Pacific consumer context. So I would use one of the example. Actually, today GFI just published an article and to talk about a blended meat solution that Nurasa has helped with our joint venture partner, Creamer. They are a co-manufacturer established in Singapore, and then another second generation SME protein player called Quality Meat, and created a first of its kind blended protein, and then the consumer just love it, and then we tick all the boxes in terms of delicious and easy to digest, healthier in terms of the all the nutrition profiles, increase the protein intake for the relatively aging populations in this region. And then more importantly is the speed. We also need to see the sorry, I'm a little bit allergic. So
It's okay.
So the speed of partnership when we work from a concept to market only 4 months, because we also need to think about the smaller medium size company. Yes, size may not be their advantage, but the speed is their advantage. And then they are deeply rooted in the local commercial ecosystem. And then this kind of a new innovation can bring to the market very quickly. And the next step scale actually still possible. Why? Is because now this concept work. And then partners that beyond Singapore, we are more than happy to work with them on this kind of solutions. So it is, I would say, a test, trial, and adapt and much quicker and faster. So hope that will be an example to share. And then you want love to hear your thoughts about your example as well in this kind of opportunities.
Well, in our space, and in our company, we think about this from the perspective of consumer insights and product testing and validation, which we work a bit with you on as well. In the consumer insight space, I think that there's a lot of solutions out there which are very agile. They're very data driven. There's a lot of data that's becoming available, first party data and other social media data and things that allow companies to understand trend better. And I think those will scale down well, right? Meaning that if you're a small startup, you can get access to a little bit of that information, and eventually it will start becoming more and more affordable. It's really a question of how the providers want to price it, right? I mean, like and you see this happening. I think even like the Nielsen's of the world and the Mintels of the world, they seem to start to have some more minimized, lower cost types of solutions because there's obviously a market there for that. In the area of product testing and product validation, which is physical product testing, it's a bit more difficult to get that information accurately. And that's one thing we're, working on making it more democratized. Part of it though, and I'd be interested to hear your feedback on this, is about knowledge, right? So it's one thing to provide access to information and data and tools. That's kind of a decision that one can make whether or not you want to lower your price and accept lower margin with higher scale to have impact. But the thing that is very costly is to provide the capability of how to use those tools. So one thing that we think about a lot at FlavorWiki is how do we make the tools that we're using, and we're constantly redesigning and re-releasing what we have to offer. How do we make these tools more accessible to people who are not specialists? because if you have to have a specialist, that creates cost, and specialists are by definition um, scarce, right? And so you can't scale something if the resource that's required to scale it is a scarce resource. It either you don't have it at all or it becomes so expensive to obtain it. And so I think there are things that technology can do to make this type of information more democratized, to use that word. And we're working on that. But that's just one very small part of the innovation cycle. There's a lot of other knowledge that goes into making a food product work in the market. I think we've seen this in the meat alternative space. There was a lot of people that didn't understand the commercial like minefield of having a food company. Like they were very passionate about technology, but they didn't understand how to make a business work. I think, and I think that scaling that down and making it more democratized in such a way that, again, not all the talent, not all the scarce talent flows into a very few number of companies because they can pay money, right? Like, how do we make that more accessible to larger numbers of players is a constant problem that we would love to solve. I mean, we're one small company, and we have to walk before we run, but I see that as a massive problem and opportunity both, in that long tail is is in need of better capabilities to do their job better.
I completely agree with what you said about the capability and the knowledge. And the knowledge, uh, for example, what I see in many large organizations, they have a large R&D, they are very talented people, but they in Asia, and they are doing lots of work. I would say if those knowledge can be shared with those small, medium size of companies, it will create very different impact.
Mhm,
However, larger corporations are not open. Even they call it open innovation, they have, but they are not really truly open
mhm,
because they already have a defined strategy to execute the product
mhm.
line that they are good at and then
Yep.
push to the market. And to market-backed innovation is only can succeed in a smaller percentage. And those,
Mhm,
to me, those very talented resources and knowledge actually has not been best monetized, or they
mhm.
choose not to.
Yes. Well, I think you're right. I think they're not set up to do it. They're not great at it.
Yeah.
And then there's also some, perverse forces, which are profit forces that prevent them from being more open. I mean, why should they in the end? Um, and I don't think that's going to really change. I think that you need kind of like a mass disruption of many of those smaller players becoming more empowered, which just puts more competitive pressure on everyone. And when that happens, maybe it's not great for shareholders in the short term, but when that happens, I think everything becomes more competitive and faster. Um, I mean, I think you see this with like even tools like ChatGPT. I'm
Yeah.
amazed to watch this.
Yeah.
Those AIs are still far away from making a lot of complex human decisions well, right? But the amount of efficiency that you can gain, it's basically disrupting internet search. It's it's
Yes.
it's it's unbelievable. And I think that sometimes you have in history these kind of small pushes of innovation explosion that that sort of empower people that are capable but previously just were not empowered. And then that creates a change in the competitive landscape, and the existing Goliaths have to react to that. And then previously the existing Goliaths didn't have the incentive to react to it,
Yes.
even though they could have, right? And
Yes.
and that's what makes change happen. And I think we're seeing that play out in the food industry. To your point, it's an industry that has much longer cycles of change because people don't give up the way they eat so quickly. But just this morning I was reading about the breakup of Dr. Pepper Keurig, and then
Yes.
Kraft is breaking up. I mean,
Yes.
there's a lot of other economic forces there which you can argue which were exogenous because of 3G Capital and other things. But really, that's just the fact that like those are big brands, and they have to become more competitive in their product offering because there's a bunch of other companies that are coming in that are smaller, which it's like death by a thousand cuts. And I think that as you get more capability from that long tail, you just will push better thinking, more innovation, more efficiency, more health, like all the things that we want to see rise with all boats in the tide has to happen. Whereas if you have a couple of big players that are just able to maintain dominance because of knowledge or capability or supply chain or other reasons strategically, they don't have an incentive to change, despite their best efforts to want to do so, right? It's the companies just don't need to. And you have to create this pressure from the bottom to get everybody to work really hard to make those changes and be competitive. I'm a capitalist. I still believe that that's necessary. Even if you try to regulate, like maybe RFK is trying to do, that you change all these things and the food companies like bend under this pressure, that's like one tiny change that they're resisting all the time. And then, of course, this person's going to go away in 3 years and maybe everything will go away. Only if you have the competitive forces of the market really playing this out do you have, I think, meaningful impact in the world. It really is about democratization and creating that fierce competition between players, right? So,
Yeah, I think the point you mentioned about the incentive, I would say there are organizations from their governance. Now let's switch the subject from the governance, right? So also part of my passion is also think about how we can really influence in terms of a public listed company, and from a capitalist point of view, if that 3 years is good, because that's kind of a return investment. But if there are long-term shareholder beyond 5 years without innovation pipeline, actually, as you said, rightly call out, in short term looks bad. But if you look at 5 years, if there is no such incentive in place, and then the company actually will underperform under a fierce competition, because food industry relatively is a open competitive market, right? So the from a shareholder value perspective, I would say is a balanced in terms of innovation index will be required. If there is no innovation index, only look at the near-term capital return. As a CEO, also look at the CEO index, right? Average CEO tenure is now about 3 years. If your CEO doesn't care about innovation, the shareholder should worry. So,
right,
right, CEO change quite often in large corporations.
right,
So then the 3 year cycle is not even enough. But I would say most of the time the industry will shift in the 5 years of time.
right,
So what kind of incentive from a governance point of view in terms to make sure under a high frequency change of the CEO, and do not use the big bang M&A as the only weapon. I would say M&A is still important. M&A is
yep,
very important, but the balance between the dollars for M&A and also the dollars for this kind of a new way of innovation, and then to make sure that the long-term shareholder of the business actually will benefit from it.
right. Yeah, I think these are very interesting kind of like force of nature questions in the way that we live as human beings. I would say like selfish yet caring. Like everybody's a little bit selfish at the end of the day, which plays out in how companies also behave. Um, so in this time that we got left, I would love to hear your perspective on this kind of ecosystem from the perspective of Singapore, which I think is quite unique. It's a wealthy place that has no food supply, right? So it's not even like Switzerland, where I live, where, I think there's a lot of security in the food supply because we produce it here. Singapore really needs to think about how do we keep not just ourselves healthy, but our surrounding, neighbors healthy, because if they're not healthy, we will not be able to get any food because we don't have the space to grow it, right? So how are they approaching that from the perspective of how they educate their population, university programs? Obviously, the government puts a lot of money into helping, organizations to be innovative, but have you seen really great practices there that you think are, things to look at as models, or you think they're doing a good job? I think it's a very unique ecosystem, particularly when it comes to food, because they can't produce it. The only thing they can do is organize information and knowledge to figure out how to make it safer, right? So
Yeah. Indeed, as you said, Singapore is a little tiny red dot as also how they talk about the country, talk about its challenge. I always say everything comes as both pros and cons. And I moved to Singapore in 2016. I live there now nearly total 10 years. When I can see the massive shift in the time when I moved to Singapore in terms of understanding and the importance, emphasis on the food and food technologies and also agriculture related. As you said, they still cannot produce, even they have the best ecosystem in some R&D, the most vibrant regional innovation center altogether. They have the talent, they have the knowledge, they have the research institution, they have the universities, have a very progressive government policies, etc. But the country still cannot produce. So that's the reality of its weakness. The strengths, how Singapore can play the role in global, actually at the global level, not even in the Asian region level, is because there's no agriculture. So there's no force to against any new innovations. There's no farmer. There's no large food manufacturer either. So in a relatively quite open space to think about anything possible. And then also as one of the global leading capital market, and then look at in terms, how to reward the most attractive innovations and commercialization opportunities. So this what I can see is that Singapore become a very unique. And then second part is Singapore is a cultural hub, the West meet East, right? So it's also a global, traditionally largest trading port. So from a logistic and from the consumer perspective, actually very unique. Singapore is only like less than 6 million people there. But when you look at the number of Changi Airport, when you look at the number of goods that transit from its port, it is a very big economy, actually. So,
Well, I mean, it's done well for itself. I mean, I think
yes,
that
indeed.
that's not necessarily an accident. Yeah.
Exactly.
Um,
So back to that point, I can see is that's what being part of this ecosystem, we are open to try any new things because there's no pushback from either side. So with that position, Singapore's position is can help the global companies, either large MNCs want to try something new because it's a very, I mean, by law it is have a very good legal protection system and also very transparent compared with the some other parts of country. So if a safe haven, I would say, a safe haven for the tech transfers and also for the large corporation or smaller and startups, etc., to try to work out something. And then the third is the talent, because that is a country have ability and the to attract people and then feel comfortable to live there, not just yourself and your family and your children. So that is when we think about the company and then the people who are driving all this innovation, the face of their life, that's also very important. So I would say with that combination, I can see that Singapore in the next 10 years will continue to drive lots of new ideas and then to commercialize. May not be able to reach to the ultimate scale, but at least to really help the innovators around the world to try the new idea and also link cross the industry. For example, like Daniel, what you're doing with Flavor Wiki, it is a technology and a merge technology and cross with the food, right? So in Singapore, I can see that as well, the AI hub, the technology hub, and then the food and agricultures and also culture. So it's quite a melting pot of any possibilities.
yeah, I agree, and thank you for those words. But also hearing you speak, it makes also sense that Nurasa in its mission is also there, and that all these ideas coming out of there and shall we say potentially solutions to how to solve some of these problems, or at least examples, being able to help transmit that elsewhere to other partners is really important, right? I do think it's unique. It's pretty unique as an organization in doing that. I mean, we meet a lot of companies that are doing accelerators or incubators or helping food companies um, to to start, but it's a different thing to talk about how do you transmit the learning of that and the operation of that from a really unique crucible of challenge to the rest of the world, and how can they apply that in solving problems locally or regionally in what they have to do. I think that I mean, if we're going to feed a population, that needs to happen. I don't think that we can rely on the profit maximizing big food companies entirely. They're part of it, but I don't, they shouldn't be the folks doing that, right? Because they're not equipped to do it. That's not really what they do, right? So.
Thank you, Daniel. We are just part of a Singapore ecosystem, but as you rightly called out, we are doing the hard work because
Yeah.
the most difficult part is actually, I would say, that the Chinese word called landed on the ground, to ground and
Yeah.
all these things, and then
Yeah.
to drive forward. And then these are the hard works. And it's great to have a partner like yourself, and also a very committed team. I always want to appreciate the team that put in all the hard works in day-to-day life to make it happen. And that's the most important part. And then we shouldn't, as you said, we shouldn't avoid those tough choices and conversations in terms of how to drive the future, and then not just look at it in terms of the near-term profit optimization.
Yep, absolutely. Well, it's been great talking to you today. I mean, I really appreciate your time, and we'll of course be in touch, and we'll let you know when this airs. And I think you're doing great work there. Another maybe in 2 more years we can do it again, see where you're at with Nurasa. So how's that?
Looking forward to it, Daniel, and then thank you very much for this opportunity.
Great. Thank you very much. Take care. Talk to
Yeah.
you soon.